All right, today we're going to be in the Unit 6 packet titled Quadratic Functions and Equations. In the last video, we finished up talking about graphing quadratic equations and all the key features that you need to know about those. So today we're going to start talking about solving quadratic equations. So we're going to be on page 15. So there are multiple ways to solve a quadratic equation, and we're going to talk about 4 of them. But the first one we're going to talk about is by factoring. So in many cases, we can find the solutions of a quadratic equation by factoring rather than graphing, following the steps below to find the solution of the given equation by factoring. So we want to set our quadratic equation equal to 0. Quadratic equation, I don't know what's wrong with me. So we're going to set it equal to 0. So that means I'm just going to take that part, okay, this part of my equation, and equal it to 0. All right, then we're going to factor the left side. So what that means to factor is I'm going to look at my last number, and I want to find things that multiply to give me that number. So on the side over here, I want to see what multiplies to give me negative 10. So negative 1 times 10, negative 10 times 1, negative 2 times 5, and negative 5 times 2. All right, those are all the things that can be multiplied together to give me 10. So now we have to decide which one to choose. And the way you do that is you want to figure out which ones are going to add together to give me 3. So negative 1 plus 10 is not 3. So that's not the right one. Negative 10 plus 1 does not give me 3. Negative 2 plus 5 gives me 3. And negative 5 plus 3 gives me negative 3. So I have to decide whether I want a positive 3 or a negative 3. Since there's a plus sign right there, we want a positive 3. So I'm going to use negative 2 and positive 5. So now that we've found our factors, I'm going to make 2 sets of parentheses. I'm going to put an x in each parentheses. And then I'm going to put my factor with x. So a negative 2 and a positive 5. And that's how you factor a trinomial. Now we have to set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. So I'm going to have x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 5 equals 0. Now I just solve for x. So for the first equation, I need to add 2 to both sides. So I'm left with x equals 2. And then here I need to subtract 5 from both sides. So x equals negative 5. And then we're going to write our answer using the curly brackets. So my smaller number comes first, so negative 5, comma 2. All right, let's look at another example. So we have x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So it's already equal to 0, so I can move on to step 2, which is to factor the left side. So I want to find all the things that multiply together to give me 3. 3 is kind of easy because it's just 1 times 3. All right, and we want to make sure that those add together to give me a positive 4. So 3 plus 1 is 4. So those are my factors. So I'm going to make my 2 sets of parentheses. I'm going to have an x in each parentheses. Then I have a positive 1 and a negative 3. Or no. A positive 3. They're both positive. Okay, now I break it apart and I equal it to 0. So I solve these for x. So for the first equation, I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. So I get x equals negative 1. And then I subtract 3 on both sides. So x equals negative 3. So we're going to use our curly brackets. Negative 3 is going to come first because it is smaller. All right, number 2. X squared plus 11x plus 24 equals 0. So it's equal to 0. So now I'm going to move on to step 2, which is to factor the left side. So I want to find things that multiply to give me a positive 24. So 1 times 24 2 times 12, 3 times 8, 4 times 6, and that's all of them. So now to decide, I need to figure out which ones are going to add together to give me a positive 11. So 1 plus 24 is 25, so that's not it. 2 plus 12 is 14, that's not it. 3 plus 8 is 11, but let's check the last one. 4 plus 6 is 10, so that's not it. So these are the two factors I'm going to use. So I'm going to make my sets of parentheses. I'm going to put an X in each parentheses, and I'm going to put my factors, positive 3, positive 8. Now I'm going to break it apart. And I'm going to solve for X. So subtract 3, X equals negative 3, subtract 8, X equals negative 8. Well, so when I use my curly brackets, negative 8 is going to come first because it is smaller. All right, number 3. X squared plus X minus 2 equals 0. So it's already equal to 0. So now I need to find factors that multiply together to give me a negative 2. So that would be negative 1 times 2 and negative 2 times 1. Now I need to figure out which pair adds together to give me a positive 1, which is going to be negative 1 plus 2. So I'm going to make my sets of parentheses. I'm going to have X minus 1 and X plus 2 in my parentheses. Then I'm going to break them apart and equal them to 0. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And then I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So when I make my curly brackets, negative 2 is going to come first because it is smaller. All right, number 4. X squared plus 6X minus 27 equals 0. So it's already equal to 0, so the next thing we have to do is find two numbers that multiply together to give me 27. So negative 1 and 27, negative 27 and 1, negative 3 and 9, and negative 9 and 3. All right, so from this list, we have to figure out which ones are going to add together to give me a positive 6. So the first one adds together to give me 26. This one adds together to give me negative 26. Negative 3 plus 9 is 6, and then negative 9 plus 3 is negative 6. So we want a positive 6, so we're going to be using negative 3 and positive 9. Then I'm going to break it apart. And I'm going to solve for X. Then when I make my curly brackets, negative 9 is going to come first because it's smaller than 3. All right, number 5. X squared minus 10x plus 21 equals 0. So it's already equal to 0, so now I need to find my factors that multiply together to give me 21. 1 and 21, 3 and 7. All right, so from this list, we need to find which ones, oops, did it again. From this list, we need to find which ones are going to add together to give me a negative 10. Okay, so this gives me 22, and this gives me a positive 10. All right, so this one is kind of weird because we want to multiply to get a positive number but add to get a negative number. So you have to remember that two negatives multiplied together also make a positive number. So I could also say -3 and -7 multiplied together will give me that positive 21. And then when I add those together, I get -10. So in this case, both of our parentheses are going to have a negative number. Okay, so then I break it apart. And I solve for x. So I'm going to add 3, plus 7, plus 7. So our answers will be 3 and 7. All right, number 6. We have x squared minus x minus 20 equals 0. So it's already equal to 0, so I need to find things that multiply together to give me a -20. So -1 and 20, -20 and 1, -2 and 10, -10 and 2, -4 and 5, -5 and 4. All right, so from this list, we want to figure out which ones are going to add together to give me a -1. So this is 19, -19, 8, -8, 1, -1. So from this list, we can see that we're going to use -5 and +4. Now I'm going to break it apart and solve for x. So that would be our final solution. All right, number 7, x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 0. So it's already equal to 0. So I need to find things that multiply to give me positive 25, which are 1 and 25, 5 and 5. So now I have to choose which ones are going to add together to give me 10, which is 5 and 5. So I'm going to break it apart. So this time we get the same answer for both equations. So when I write my final answer, I'm only going to write it one time, because remember, the squiggly lines make a list, and I'm not going to write two of the same things in my list, so I only write it once. All right, and then the last one, number 8. It's already equal to 0, so I need to find things that multiply together to give me 16. All right, so from that list, I need to figure out which ones are going to add together to give me a -8. All right, so from this list, to get a positive 8, we can do 4 and 4, but to get a -8, I could do -4 times -4. So I'm going to be using 2 -4s. Then I'm going to equal them to 0. So again, we get the same answer for both equations, so when I make my squiggly brackets, I'm only going to write it once. And that concludes the notes for solving quadratics by factoring.